All right. Hello and good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for joining this virtual panel for the Society for International Development's annual conference. The panel you are joining right now is going to be discussing the impact of the Russian invasion of Ukraine on African food security. You know, this is not a food security niche topic. This is mainstream, as many of you know. You've seen even in the news, the head of David Beasley appealing to Putin himself to open up, the ports. There was just a really interesting report that came out by Oxfam and Save the Children talking about the 23 million in East Africa that are going to be facing extreme hunger because of the food prices that are soaring, as well as drought, as well as other issues that have been exacerbated by the Ukraine war. And that's what we're going to talk about today. My name is Kimberly Flowers, and I will be the moderator and guiding us through this conversation. We have some remarkable panelists who are going to be joining us, and I'm going to just quickly go through their names and their background to give you a sense of who we'll be hearing from. We'll be hearing from Dr. Joe Glauber. Joe has been a senior research fellow at the International Food Policy Research Institute. Many know Joe from his 3 decades of experience at USDA. He also is quite the expert on trade policy, which is something we definitely want to be diving into today. We also have Dr. Bram Govaerts. He is with the International Maize and Wheat Improvement Center, or CIMMYT, as most of us know. He's the Director General of CEO. He is also an international authority on all things related to maize and wheat cropping systems. And as we well know, it's wheat, it's barley, it's sunflower oil, it's fertilizer. These are the things that are the commodities that have been the issues that are not coming out of Russia and Ukraine right now. And he can talk to us about how that's affecting small-scale farming in Africa. We also have with us Tamzin Hudson. Tamzin is joining us from South Africa. Hello, Tamzin. She is a consultant with the African Future and Innovations Program, which is part of the Institute for Security Studies. She has spent her career working in diplomacy, but she also understands land tenure and land reform and urbanization. And those are things that we're going to be talking about as well. We also have joining with us Dr. Nwafra. He's having a few technical difficulties, so he'll be joining us by video soon, if not by voice. But Dr. Apollos is the vice president with policy for policy and state capability with AGRA, or the Alliance for Green Revolution in Africa. He's done a lot of different things over the span of his career, but a lot of it has been around strategic policy support. There he is. Hello, Apollos. We can see you on video. But he's going to talk to us about agriculture development and some thoughts he has on what's happening on the ground. Before we begin, I just want to say thank you to DevWorks. They are sponsoring this panel. They're one of the sponsors for this conference. Many of you probably know them as they used to be called SID-USA. They implement a lot of USAID projects for over 12 years now in 21 countries across Africa, Asia, and South America. They focus on equitable social and economic growth, creating stronger, more resilient communities. So thank you, DevWorks. And on behalf of DevWorks, I'm excited to dive right into this discussion. Joe, I think I want to start with you. I laid a little bit of the groundwork at the beginning, but not much. Talk to us first, help us lay the groundwork here. How has the war in Ukraine affected African food markets? What are the countries and commodities that have been most affected here? Joe, what do you think?
Yeah, no, I think this is really a question. You almost have to start with wheat, just because wheat is important both for Russia and Ukraine. Is 30% or so. These numbers have been out in the media. I keep reminding people that these areas 25 years ago were net food importers. So a remarkable transformation over the last 25 years. But they have become the breadbasket of the world. And it does appear that Russian wheat is moving now, which is good for those who are importing wheat. Those areas most affected by the blockade of Ukraine ports have been, North African countries. Those countries, everyone's affected by high prices, and the fact that prices have gone up 20, 30, 35, 40% in some cases across the board for some of these commodities. Everyone's feeling those higher prices. I think in areas where per capita consumption of wheat is quite high, so that's North Africa, Middle East, Central Asia, they're going to continue to buy wheat and continue to feed wheat. But those food prices are high, or at least have to be addressed through targeted consumer subsidies and other sorts of things that we see in those areas. I think if we move out through the rest of the world, there's other countries that import a lot of wheat, either for feed purposes or food purposes. There we may see a little bit of demand rationing. That is a little less demand because the prices are so high. But again, what is important here is the affordability issue. And I think that's why you see David Beasley out looking for funds to help on humanitarian aid. The availability is there. Supplies are really tight. They were tight even going into this war. And so it's going to take a while, I think, to kind of rebuild supplies, let alone the fact that to do that, you really need the war to stop. So.
In the opening keynote, I heard, U.S. State Administrator Samantha Power mention this, and she said we have a looming food crisis. I would challenge that a little bit. I don't disagree with her much, but I feel like we're already in a food crisis. Apollos, I'd like to turn to you to get your response to that, and then Bram, and then we'll bring in some others. But do you feel like we are already in a food crisis because of the Ukraine war, never mind the drought, the pandemic, everything that's going on? What is your perspective on this topic?
Thanks. And hi, everyone. I hope you can hear me. I just wanted to be sure that it's great. Thanks. I think, first of all, we are actually in a food crisis, but very little is known about it yet. And that's because there's been some level of storage that's available. We know countries had to release from their strategic food reserves in the last 2 months. I know countries like Tanzania, like Zambia, like Malawi, like Nigeria, they've all released different amounts of food grains, staples actually, from their strategic food reserves. But it's depleting actually. By the time we get to the next planting season, we're very worried that then the crisis will hit hard. So the impact is not necessarily being felt now, but it's there. Secondly is the fact that we see that farmers are no longer using the fertilizer because the prices of fertilizers have actually doubled. So what that means is that we're going to, if there's no incentive to have the farmers access fertilizers, at prices that are available to them, then we're likely to see very low yields by the next season, by the next harvest season. It means that, apart from the fact that strategic food reserves are depleted now, then with low yields in the next harvest season, then the crisis is going to hit much more harder. A third is around, we're now seeing the rise of protectionism. So we're seeing a number of countries, putting in non-tariff measures, to actually block food from being exported because, they want to make sure that they've got food at home. A hunger crisis is actually a political crisis that's brewing, because you're then going to have civil unrest and all that. So they're trying to avoid that. So they're putting non-tariff measures, which is then having an impact on trade, and cross-border trade in particular for food and agricultural products. So what that means is that within a few months down the line, we're likely going to face a huge crisis going ahead. I think it's just the fact that no one is seeing it now, or very few people are seeing it, but the impact is actually very worrisome within a few months down the road.
Thank you so much for that perspective. Bram, I saw you nodding your head quite a bit, especially in the fertilizer issue. What do you think? Is this a looming food crisis, or are we already there?
Yeah, thanks. I guess it all depends on how you look at the crisis. And we know the stellar career of Administrator Power and the situations she has been in and has been covering. So I think we need to distinguish the type of crisis we're looking at. There's, of course, a devastating war that is creating an immediate crisis, and this is about getting grain out. Yeah, and that's looming in the sense that we can still negotiate. We're trying to do what we can. And I think Apollos also indicated it's going to get worse. But at the same time, this shows the real and deep crisis. Even if the war stops, even if there's immediate peace, this is just an example of a system in crisis. It is just one shock that was now provoked by the Russia-Ukraine war, but tomorrow it will be terminal drought, like we see in India, on top of what's already there with the wheat production. It will be another food basket, a bread basket that will be affected, I don't know, by another weather impact. So the shocks are coming faster, and they're coming and they're coming deeper. So actually fixing this crisis is really about fixing the fundamental vulnerabilities of the system. And I do want to highlight that, because there is, of course, a tendency right now to immediately respond to this immediate lead. And it's very difficult for all of us. I almost compare it like we're running to save ourselves, right? So how can you then start talking about a better world in 2100 while we're all just running to save ourselves? But I think we need to get fierce and bold leadership that really can say, okay, we're gonna look at this particular crisis. We need to respond now, because there's also an opportunity. We have never had the data systems that we have today. We still feel we don't know enough, but relatively we have more data than ever. We have more predictive power than ever, which leaves us with an opportunity. We can still do something today. It also leaves us with a responsibility. We cannot say we didn't know. There's lessons learned from the Arab Spring. There's lessons learned from the processes before. I'm seeing very similar processes, but we're looking at it ahead. We are further in the curve of time looking at it. So in that sense, I understand the looming crisis while we are already in a crisis. And so I think what we need is very concrete. In the short term, of course, the priority is getting in the short term is getting that grain flowing. In the short term, the priority is to mitigate further food security shocks by boosting production in existing high and low productivity areas, by applying demand and supply side market incentives, and even looking at flour substitution. And maybe there's other crops we can use, not only wheat, not only, because things are going to get more complicated, as Apollo said. In the medium term, we really must increase the local, regional, and global resilience of wheat and cereal supply in general throughout our targeted expansion within agroecological boundaries, supporting self-sufficiency pathways combined with open trade, providing comprehensive technical support in the production systems, and mainstreaming independent crop monitoring capacity. And in the longer term, we need to start today for that long term, which is a shift from efficiency to resilience in the overall agri-food system. Last but not least, let's all avoid what I call, and I take it from somebody I deeply respect. Let's avoid what I call the stadium effect. We're all sitting down, we're watching a concert, a football match, or what you like to watch. And there's this one guy that all of a sudden says, I think I can see better if I stand up. And so he stands up. Very soon, the next guy stands up. And I can guarantee you 15 minutes later, everybody's standing up in the stadium. What is the effect? We see exactly the same as we were seeing before when we were sitting down, with the difference that we are getting tired because we're standing on our foot. So we really need to avoid that effect of a very short-term benefit. Somebody had a very short-term benefit. This guy standing up for 15 minutes could see better. But it ended up that overall, we were worse off in the end of the process. So how do we avoid standing up stadium effects in our responses to the crisis that is happening? And that is about closing borders. That is about, so we need to avoid those responses deeply by looking further ahead of the impact of our short-term decisions.
I've never heard that analogy before. I like it. I'm going to now steal it from you. So thank you. Tamzin, I want to turn to you and get your first your overall reactions to some of the things that's been said and just the situation. And then I want to go to Joe and talk about trade policy. Tamzin, go ahead.
Yes, no, thank you so much. I think that one of the things that really struck me is fixing the fundamental vulnerabilities that we face, and the fact that there are so many systemic problems and shocks. And I think that this is really which was my starting point in preparing for today, because essentially what's happening in Africa predates this Russian invasion. And so, you know, the kinds of problems, I mean, at this current moment, Africa's ability to feed its people is in crisis. 281 million people in Africa do not have enough food to eat each day. and nearly 3/4 of the African population cannot afford nutritious food. So we are already in a major food crisis. And just to note, perhaps, you know, the extreme shocks from climate change, that's really taking hold. And so, for instance, particularly in East Africa, there's been severe drought. And I just wanted to just mention that that the rains particularly in the Horn, East and Central Africa, has prolonged a very serious drought since 2021. And it's a dire humanitarian situation that we're facing with. And the worst plague of locusts, as I think many of you would have read about, in 70 years. So many harvests have failed, and more than 44 million people need humanitarian assistance. So I think that really sets the scene in Africa. Of course, it's an enormous continent, and you know, so the impacts are different in each particular region. And I think that the real trick, if I can call it that, going forward, will really be to have, again, as was mentioned, very strong data systems and a really deep understanding of also what is working well. Because what will eventually have to happen is that the regions that are faring much better and have maybe surpluses in one season or in a few seasons, or are able to build up, you know, what Apollos was talking about was these food reserves. We're going to really have to get a better picture of, and then also begin to start being able to really, as it were, to be able to turn to other regions and other countries to fill the gaps. So I think it's going to have to be a far more integrated continental model. And I think, just to mention, just lastly, I think the fundamental importance of partnerships, that just cannot be stressed more than ever. What I mean by that is right across from governments and at all levels. I think what we don't often speak enough about is local government systems and local government. That's where the planning takes place. That's where you know, a lot will have to be focused on. So, but across from private sectors, research institutes, and IFIs, multilaterals. Thank you very much.
No, that actually blends directly into talking about trade policy, talking about local government sort of leadership, right? We all know how important that is. So, Joe, you know, Apollos already brought up talking about protectionism and the non-tariffs, and you know, making sure we're pulling from reserves. Talk to us a little bit more about trade policy. How important is that? What are we seeing in this crisis right now? And what are some examples of countries that are both doing good things with trade policy and maybe not so good things?
Yeah, so yes, exactly. I mean, this is where trade can really be a big help, obviously, is when you have production shortfalls in one region or longer term shifts like climate change, where you know, there are certain areas of the world that cannot feed themselves. I think it is important to echo Bram's point to try to close yield gaps and things like that to increase productivity. But self-sufficiency in and of itself as a goal, you know, you have to look at the costs of doing that. And you know, I would argue the same thing for diversity. We often talk about, well, gee, these countries in North Africa, they really need to have diversified suppliers. Well, in fact, the grain coming out of the Black Sea is quite cheap, low cost relative to other areas. So, you know, do you necessarily want to go that way to say, well, I'm not going to buy from the Black Sea all the time because I need to have a diversified supply, even if it's considerably more expensive? No, I think what you need are systems that are quite flexible and where that you can turn to other suppliers. And frankly, the grain trade actually does a pretty good job here if there aren't interventions by countries to block the free flow of grain. And I think that Bram's point about export restrictions is exactly right. I mean, we saw that in 2007, 2008, 2010, 11, and now we see it again here, where we have countries that are putting on restrictions that impede the flow of grain. And I think that's where, you know, it's hard to get a country to say, well, I'm going to lower my trade barriers if they can't necessarily, and depend more on the foreign market if you're going to have countries shutting off supply. Moreover, export restrictions really hurt domestic producers. So, you may be sympathetic to the view that for an individual country, yes, this keeps prices low for consumers within that country, but it really penalizes producers. And we've seen cases like Argentina during the 2000s, where you had several years of export restrictions, and what happened? Wheat area fell in those countries. It's just those things can really have longer term effects. So I think that that's important thing is to keep trade moving where possible. I mean, I think this whole trying to make sure that we're exempting food from this war, and I think trying to get a corridor out of Ukraine is very important, because doing it by land is way too costly. The system isn't set up to export through these by rail out through Europe, like Romania or Poland. It's set up to go through those ports on the Black Sea, and the sooner we can get that back into the system, I think, the sooner we'll have recovery here.
Paulos, I want to turn back to you and then Bram, because both of you are in a position where you give a lot of advice, I'm assuming, to whether it's government leaders, private sector, folks that work in this industry. And, the audience for our conference today is, international development practitioners, people who are working on the ground in these countries with smallholder farmers to increase resilience, lift farmers out of poverty. They know full well the impact of climate change and a lot of the issues that we've already talked about. But Paulos, what advice would you give to international development practitioners in terms of dealing with this issue? Is there ways that they need to pivot? Is there ways that they need to lean more on data? Is there any advice that you would give either to donors or development practitioners alike on solutions to what we're dealing with right now?
Great, thanks. I think there are a number of solutions that we can look at first. First is on strengthening data systems, and that may sound vague, but that's really important. One of the things that we've been working on with some of our partners, like the FCDU, which is DFID, USAID, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, and Rockefeller and a number of other partners, is we're leading the development of a regional food balance sheet. That is going to help to strengthen data systems, respond to the questions of where's the nutritious food, who has that, what are the pricing mechanisms in place, and how do we make sure that food is moving from surplus to deficit. So that's one way of strengthening data systems that's really critical. We're doing that with the member states of COMESA, that's the Common Market for East and Southern Africa, and as well as we're going to be doing that as well for the ECOWAS member states to make sure that, the political leadership has a very clear overview of what's going on and what data that's credible enough to help them make the right decisions going forward. So that is ongoing. That's one way of, but another way is to ensure that country M&E systems, have this data that is linked to the overall economic agenda. Agriculture is not, a standalone, is not a standalone sector. It contributes to economic growth. In fact, it is a driver of economic growth as far as Africa is concerned. It's not a product of economic growth. And if we look at it from that, we'll see why data systems are really important, because then they help with planning, with decision making, but also to ensure that the politicians are not making decisions based on assumptions and on some of the knee-jerk issues that are affecting us. And that, in particular for trade, that improves policy predictability, because you want to make sure that you're making the right policies and that you're not hurting the markets, the private sector. That's really important. A second is around diversification. One of the things we've seen is that as much as there's wheat, which most of Africa relies on, countries like Ethiopia, Nigeria, we know there are 20 countries that actually import 90% of their wheat from Russia and Ukraine, and those 20 countries are going to go through stress. But we've said, look, go into diversification. So we're talking with countries and we're saying to them, what are the alternatives? maize, of course, there's millet, there's also, the other sources of nutrition that wheat provides. A third is around ensuring that we are taking a regional approach and having a support system that supports countries. So we're looking at where the countries that actually produce more, and are always in surplus, they could then help to support countries that are usually in deficit. So that's, and of course, a fourth area is around, ensuring that we are, supporting private sector, to access markets, and granting them short-term incentives, that will help them, address some of the deficits or some of the cost of operations that they're going to face now as a result of this crisis. I think one more critical issue is the fact that we've said in the short term, governments can begin to think about smart subsidies for fertilizers and other inputs, because if farmers are not ready to use fertilizers, particularly smallholder farmers, which make up the larger farming population in the continent, then we need to look at smart subsidies to ensure that they have access to fertilizers, and we can at least continue to increase yields, and drive productivity to ensure that we don't run into a very dire food crisis. I mean, like was earlier stated, you've got 281 million people who go to bed hungry out of 1.3 billion Africans. That's a lot, but that's on the acute. But you've also got another set of 385 million people who can't access nutritious foods. And then the rest of the population, actually are actually working to make sure that they're not just feeding their nuclear families, but external other dependents who depend on these breadwinners who are also sitting. So it's actually a crisis that we need to actually deal with, and we've actually not fully recovered from COVID, to be honest. The COVID crisis saw us, dropping in productivity by over 18%, and hunger increasing by over 20%. So some of these measures, in the short and medium term is important. But in the longer term, we need to think about resilient systems, resilient food and agricultural systems, whereby they will be able to be resilient to these shocks that we're seeing. Because honestly, I don't mean to sound like a prophet of doom. These shocks are not going to end. There's going to be another one, but we need to be prepared for it. So building resilient food and agricultural systems, in the longer term. And this is where development partners can support. This is where private sector needs to play a role. And this is where governments need to show leadership. So one of the things we're saying is we need to review agricultural investment plans and make sure that we're building in resilience into those investments, to ensure that they are prepared for future shocks that are coming.
Yes. You're not the prophet of doom. You're just being realistic, right? But a couple of things, you gave us a lot of information there. I mean, one is I'm thrilled to see, and I'm sure there are M&E and data people in the audience who are like, yes, the amount of times that data has come up. You don't see that all of the time. But I also want to point out the fact that you said, Apollos, 20 countries in Africa, 90% of their wheat comes from Ukraine. To me, that is just an absolutely shocking statistic that we need to keep in mind. Bram, I want to turn to you and then to Tamzin. Bram, I mean, you already gave us a lot of kind of solutions that you see to this, but other advice that you want to give to, international development practitioners, government leaders, donors of, again, how to best address this and, again, learn from this, right? You brought up the Arab Spring, but how are we going to learn from this? Because unfortunately, it's probably going to happen again or be sustained for quite some time.
Thanks. And let me start with the warning that includes myself and my organization and the type of organizations around that. And let me say it very simply, we're not going to get away with this one. What I mean is, I think we got away with, and you just referred to the Arab Spring. And get away, I mean, there's many organizations, many of those listening here, we had the responsibility to avoid this from happening. And we started to get our act together, and then the shock went over and we went a little bit back. to normal, and we're restarting now some of the mechanisms that we created. I am convinced society will not get away with it once again. So we better are ready to seriously respond and keep going. But at the same time, I want to say to all online, do not give up. Let's not get cynical, because the day we get cynical, that's when we lose it. And I know it sounds really difficult, but I strongly believe we need to keep in mind, what do we need to do so that in 2100, those living then, which sounds far away, but those of you that have small kids, very likely they will be alive in 2100. So what do we need to do so that your kids in 2100 say, luckily in 2022, they took the right decision, and that's why we are in a better world. Very concretely, for development practitioners, there's innovations out there that we can deploy right away. But when I say we can deploy, actually, I cannot deploy. CIMMYT has the innovation, some of the other centers in the CGIAR, some of the universities, the innovations are there, but we need you on the ground to actually rapidly deploy that in an ordered way, in a methodological way. And please let us put the feedback loop with the data when we do that. Last but not least, it's my dream that we can create an intersection between the more data research-oriented organizations and those of you on the ground. There's a gap, and we urgently need to create that mid-piece, that intersection where we can come together, have a common language, and count on me to be a partner in that. And why? Because I think we need to urgently future-proof development. Because what we innovate today is only going to go to the farmer 15 years from now. Now, the development intervention you do today will have an immediate impact, but also a future impact. So if we look at two options to intervene, we seriously need to have the conversation. If they both work, which of those is best future-proof? If we can send drought-resistant seed, let's do and send drought-resistant seed. So at the same time, it's a very simple example. So at the same time, we're starting to build that resilience in the system. So it's basically those three recommendations. Number one, let's not get cynical and get the job done. Number two, there's innovations out there that can be deployed. So let's get that conversation going. Number three, let's together future-proof so that we have humanitarian intervention, development, and growth towards resilience through an interface that we create between the different institutions. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Bram. Tamzin, what have we missed? What are some points that you want to add? There's a lot, right, to talk about this. But I had a specific question for you around sort of how this affects other areas of growth in Africa, because I know you could talk about finance or land tenure, but I'm going to leave that to you because time is short. Whether you want to talk about how this affects other areas, or there are just other points in this discussion that you want to address. Go ahead.
Yes, thank you so much, Kimberly. And this is really a rich conversation. One of the things that really struck me was and I think Apollo's kind of alluded to this being kind of an economic or financial crisis. But I think what's so fundamental to this question that the overall question of food security is how addressing the agricultural crisis, the food security, is so fundamental to Africa's overall development. And what I mean by that is essentially that to have a healthy society, to have a productive society from an economic standpoint, and also just referring to the Arab Spring, this whole idea of a peaceful society and a more prosperous society. And I think just also thinking about those overall larger goals of the Sustainable Development Goals. But I think what this is also alluding to is the kind of integrated nature of all of these issues that we're dealing with. So it's quite right to say that this is not simply a question of food security alone, but also how does that then impact across society? And so what you really see emerging are these ideas of having sort of an overall governance system, or like all of government, all of society. And so I think one of the things I do want to pick up on is the question of governance. I think I did allude to it earlier, but I think that's really critical. And by that, what I mean is also part of building stronger institutions, so building more capacity, building more knowledge, and just being able to kind of decentralize. But there are a host of things, and I think, you know, it's important to also mention this idea of making sure that people have land rights. You know, though that is so critical to people being able to invest. In the absence of clear land rights, there is a reticence to make those investments that are so sorely required, and of course. The other thing, I think, maybe just because time is running out, but I think one of the things that we also we've mentioned a whole host of things, having targeted support investments to vulnerable people, promoting open trade, you know, addressing the whole fertilizer issue, investments in resilient agriculture, coordinating for maximum impact. But I think also the whole science and you know, essentially the technology side. And I know the Food and Agricultural Organization has already got its 1,000 Digital Villages initiative, which is being piloted in several African countries to equip communities with digital tools. And I think this can also be very transformative. And so, you know, again, coming back to electronic land registries and applications for pest and disease management, extension services, and essentially providing information for farmers on around markets, what's required, what are the prices. So I think also mobilizing that sort of technology across the sector can also be very transformative. So thank you.
Thank you. Joe, I have like 10 questions I want to ask you. There's not enough time, but I think what I want to end with you on is, you know, I can't help but think about the food price crisis of 2007, 2008, or 2011, you know, like I know the context is different, but have we been here before? Is this totally new and different? What lessons can we learn? Like when you think about the span of your career and how long you've looked at this issue, how do you, I don't want to say necessarily compare, because of course they're different, but how do you think about this in terms of food price crises we've seen before, how this is new, how it's the same?
Yeah, certainly a lot of similarities, just in terms of the fact that we had so many people affected, right? In 2007, 8, and 2010, 11 in particular. Both those times it was essentially wheat and rice, and we did have the other grains prices were raised as well. I think significantly this time it's not rice, but I share everyone's concern here about what the ultimate impact of restrictions on fertilizer exports will be, because that will hit Asian countries and others who are planting rice, and that's something I think that we all need to watch very carefully. The other, you know, a lot of other differences and similarities. Certainly, fertilizer prices are much higher this time around. We had high energy prices certainly in 2007-8, but not natural gas, at least in North America. So, nitrogen-based fertilizer prices were pretty reasonable. Then now, of course, they're everywhere, very, very high. You know, some macroeconomic differences, but a lot of similarities. I think the biggest difference, though, is, you know, unlike a drought where you have a bad yield shortfall in one region, you expect it to get back to normal weather the next year. Here we have a war that's unclear when it's going to end, how much it's going to actually impact both the existing crops, the crops that will be harvested, and planning to come. So that is a huge source of uncertainty, and unfortunately can't be resolved. Even again, we keep getting back to this thing that if you could resolve the war tomorrow, you still have, it takes a long time to get winter or to get wheat production. You know, producers will make planning decisions, but remember 60% of that's traded in the world is planted in the fall. And so you won't really get much, you know, the response we see. We're currently very concerned about the North American crop, or particularly in the US, or the winter wheat crop. The spring wheat plantings are behind schedule because of wet weather. The winter wheat is in trouble in the southern part because of dry weather. And we have some dryness in the EU right now that we're closely following. Then you turn to, you know, plantings in the southern hemisphere and other sorts of things that can make a difference, could come online by the end of the year. But I think we're really talking in the best of worlds, we're really talking 18 months, into 2023 at the earliest to really see prices start to regulate. And again, there's just a huge uncertainty there with what happens in Ukraine. So again, that to me obviously is the big difference. But otherwise, export restrictions, all those things, we've seen those in the past. Hopefully, we won't see quite like what we saw in 2007-8. And again, I keep thinking rice is the wild card there, that right now everything is good, but it's hard to keep one price of one commodity low for a really long time if all the other ones are at record high levels. You will see some substitution for feed, for example, but more importantly, I think this fertilizer issue could be very, very, have more implications down the road.
Thank you so much, Joe. I have one final question for all of you. We'll kind of do it as a quick lightning round. My question is what sources do you recommend to our audience to stay up to date on this issue? As you've all laid out, this isn't going away. So I'm always curious, who do you follow? Who do you watch? Who do you read? Who do you listen to? Is there a podcast, a book, a person, an organization? How do you stay smart on this issue? So that's my last question to all of our panels, and we'll go very quickly. We're going to go in the order I see you. We'll go Bram, Joe, Tamzin, and then we'll end with Apollos. Bram, how do you stay smart on this stuff?
I think you need to. It's not just one person, one leader or thought leader or one mentor. You need a set of mentors because there's different skills, different information streams. I would even say don't read one newspaper, read different newspapers, and it's amazing how you get very different worldviews. And for sure, don't take the information only from your Facebook because that's already streamlined to one direction. So multiple information and just looking, take a step back and be a spectator for a moment to the information you get, and then think, what's the role I can play within that? It's very important. Thanks a lot.
That's great. Joe, what are your thoughts on sources to stay smart?
Yeah, I'll give you the real wonky answer. I obviously I follow the USDA reports. I follow the IGC reports. I follow AMIS reports. I'm currently interim secretary for AMIS, so I see those quite a lot. So those are monthly reports that come out. Otherwise, again, wonky answer, but I spend a lot of time perusing, the major news sources for day-to-day information on export restrictions and that sort of thing.
There's a lot of wonky people in the audience, so I think
yeah, no.
Okay,
but let me put in also a plug that IFPRI, like a lot of other organizations, have trackers on things like export restrictions and other sorts of things. So that's a really good source of data as well. Okay. And
what does AMIS stand for, Joe?
I'm sorry. So it's the Agricultural Market Information System. It comes out of the G20. 2011 agricultural ministers had decided that following the price spikes of 2007-8, 2010-11, that they needed a source of information that people could look at, feel like it was an objective source of information. It's been operating ever since. We put out a monthly monitor. And draw in that monitor, you can find data from USDA, data from the IGC, and AMIS FAO data. So it's actually quite informative particularly for the casual reader. I think if you're following markets, you're looking at everything every day.
Wonderful.
But thanks.
Thank you, Joe. And Tamzin, I saw you put a link in the chat. So tell us about that link.
Yes, that's what I wanted to mention. So this is a book that was released in 2020, and it's called African Futures, and it is available open source. I would definitely recommend to take a look at it. It's really using, in fact, and interestingly, it uses international financial futures from the Party Center, which is housed in the University of Denver. And so definitely, and again, it's very much an integrated approach. It cuts across from health to education to agriculture, right across Africa's current path and future path. So please go ahead and consult it. Thank you. But as for me, I use a broad range of sources. Go ahead, Apollos.
Oh, sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off, Tamzin. Sorry. Apollos, what do you pay attention to, and what should we be paying attention to?
So I want to start by saying I actually agree with what everyone has said. That's really important. So mine is just in addition to that. I do listen to the governments directly because we've got direct links to them. They tell us what's happening on ground, and that helps us to then look at the data. Second is actually to we collect data also from private sector, from the independent partners, and then we produce what is called the Food Security Monitor. So you could go to our website, the AGRA website, you get the Food Security Monitor, which is released monthly. But now that the crisis has started, I do chair a food crisis advisory team. So we release our briefings every 2 weeks, but it's made up of data that we've reviewed from different sources and what we've directly heard from the governments themselves. And I think what is key here is triangulation, triangulating the data from the multiple sources, and making sure that you're having a balanced view of what's going on, right? And I think also is to probably check also what's also coming from what you might consider as alternative sources. I'll use the word alternative, but I'm sure you guys understand what I mean. And that helps you to sort of understand what others are thinking and how people are looking at it from different perspectives. Because when you are looking at the data, then you're asking yourself, what's behind this? Mm-hmm. Who's releasing this data, and what are they trying to communicate? Because part of the challenge we're facing now is that there's also some form of miscommunication, and so as we look at multiple sources, we need to do our analysis and then triangulate, mm-hmm. whatever the multiple data sources we're looking at.
That's an excellent point. Thank you so much. Thank you so much to our entire panel. We're grateful for all of you who joined us today. I wish you the best of luck as you continue for those who are in the conference, whether you're in person or online. A lot of great conversations and a really packed agenda. Thank you again to our experts for joining us. This is not going away, so this is a conversation that will continue. Have a wonderful day, everyone. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you so much. Bye-bye. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Great conversation. Thanks, Kimberly. Well done.
Thanks,
Kimberly.
everyone.
My pleasure.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, everyone. I enjoyed meeting all of you, and thanks for the great conversation.
Thanks, everyone.